If you love me, please don't judge me. Got my hands tied, the power's above me. Don't shoot the messenger, I'm just a puppet here. If you wanna place blame, then look to the puppeteer. Family, fortune, envy, jealousy, privilege, passed on, legacy, secret, sabotage, borderline, felony, suicide, subtract, selfish, pedigree, yeah.
How's it going, everybody? It's C-RadTV back here with another video. So, of course, we're now going to be continuing on our What If NASCAR Had the F1 Point System series, as we go into part 2 of the series, focusing on the 1960s. So, in the last part of this series, we looked at the 1950s and 1949, the first years of NASCAR's existence. In that, we saw quite a few different champions, including some that we didn't think would ever win a championship, and a little bit of reread history in that last part to earlier to the 50s, and we also had a couple championship battles go down to the wire. And this part, we're going to continue on with the 1960s to see what would have happened if NASCAR had an F1 points format. So, of course, right here, NASCAR, there were two different points formats used in the F1 style that we're going to use. Of course, 1960 will be the top 6 what finishers would get points, with the race winner getting 8. And then in 1961, it changed to where the race winner would get 9 points. As you see there, that system would be used until 1990. So those will be the two formats we'll be using in this video. Starting with the first year will be with the 8 points for the race winner. Then the rest of the vid will be from 1961 on. It will be 9 points for the race winner. And before we continue on and jump into this, let me just stress out that this is just a hypothetical scenario. I know everyone would have raced differently had this format been in play. This is just for fun. So now, with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and let's jump right into it. So, in 1960, the championship battle was mainly between Rex White and Lee Petty. Now, Ned Jarrett and Richard Petty were also part of this championship fight too for the longest time, but both of them would falter the second half of the year and start to fall off late in the season, so it ended up coming down to a two-man battle between Lee Petty and Rex White. But in the end, Rex White was able to edge out Lee Petty with a couple races to go and would end up winning his first championship. So 1961, it was all about Rex White. He was just the model consistency. He ran very consistent over the rest of the field. Was able to get the best points possible throughout a majority of the races in 1961. And Rex White, he would cruise to a second consecutive championship with ease, so he would end up winning his second title in 1961. So 1962, we would have a pretty close and intense championship battle between Joe Weatherly and Richard Petty. But Richard Petty would start to fall off the second half of the season. Joe Weatherly would continue to remain consistent and always finish in the points. Richard Petty was on and off. And Joe Weatherly would end up pulling away from Richard Petty in the second half of the year. And Weatherly would end up winning his first championship. So, 1963, the championship battle, it would consist between Richard Petty and Ned Jarrett. Both of them were pretty consistent for the most part, but the second half of the year, it would be all Richard Petty. Richard Petty would just flat out could be more consistent than Ned Jarrett. Ned Jarrett would just start to fall off the second half of the year. And Richard Petty in the second half of the year, he would end up pulling away from Ned Jarrett. And Richard Petty would end up winning his first championship a year sooner than he did in real life. And even under this format, Lee Petty and Richard Petty would still become the first father-son duo to win titles in the Cup Series. So 1964, we would have the rematch championship battle where it'd be Ned Jarrett versus Richard Petty, round 2 for the championship. This one was a lot closer than the year prior. Both of them are very consistent. It was a very close championship throughout the year. It went down to the wire, but in the end, Ned Jarrett would one-up Richard Petty in this battle and get the rematch, as Ned Jarrett would edge out Richard Petty for the championship with a race to go in the season. And Ned Jarrett would end up winning his first championship in the rematch. So 1965, it was not even a close championship. Ned Jarrett just put a complete stomping on the field in 1965. I think he won like 15 races or something like that. It was an insane amount of races. He just completely was just outright dominant all season. And he ends up cruising to a second consecutive championship. Also in this season, Junior Johnson becomes the first driver in under this format to have a double-digit win season and not win the championship. So if anyone's wondering, yes, it is possible to have a double-digit win season under this format and not win the championship. Sometimes it happens, and it was very common in the 60s, that's for sure. Especially when they were running around 50-something races a year. But yeah, Ned Jarrett ends up winning his second consecutive championship. So 1966, it was all about David Pearson. Pearson would have a very dominant, very consistent year, put together a number of race wins. Like, the only guys that were close to him were Richard Petty and James Hilton, but none of them were as consistent as Pearson, and David Pearson would end up cruising to his first career championship in 1966. So, 1967, this was the season that Richard Petty pretty much had the greatest season in NASCAR history, winning 27 races and having 10 of those wins coming in a row. And of course, the 10-race winning streak and the 27 race wins in 1967, both are NASCAR records that still stand to this day, and more than likely will never be broken in NASCAR ever. Like, it was not even remotely close in the championship battle, and this would end up being one of the easiest championships Richard Petty would ever win in his career. So Petty would end up cruising to a second career championship. So 1968, we would have the championship battle between David Pearson and Richard Petty, where both of them were very consistent and kept up with each other for the most part of the years. But the second half of the year, Richard Petty would start to fall off, and David Pearson would start to maintain his consistency and would end up pulling away from Richard Petty. And he had a second half of the year, David Pearson would end up pulling away from Richard Petty, and Pearson would end up winning his second championship in 3 years. So 1969, it was all about David Pearson. Like, no one was able to keep up with him. Like, David Pearson's consistency in 1969 was on a whole nother level. Despite Bobby Isaac and Richard Petty's best efforts, neither of them could keep up and match the consistency David Pearson was putting up. week in and week out. David Pearson wound up cruising to his second consecutive championship, and this would be David Pearson's third title in 4 years. And under this format, David Pearson would end up becoming the first driver to win at least 3 championships in their career. In real life, it was Lee Petty, but in this one, it's David Pearson. But yeah, anyway, that's going to wrap it up here for this video here. So for this part here in the 60s, so for this one, none of the championship battles went down to the final race of the season. The closest one to come to it was 1964 between Ned Jarrett and Richard Petty. However, in terms of the champions, though, 3 titles would change under this format than in real life. And those 3 would be 1961, 1963, and 1964. And the other main difference is that David Pearson would end up becoming the first 3-time champion in NASCAR history under this format, or the first driver to win 3 championships, to correct myself there. And David Pearson would also have, quote, the first dynasty in NASCAR history. And if anyone's wondering, a dynasty is considered winning 3 championships within at least 3 championships within a 10-year span, dating back to the year of your first championship. And yeah, I think it's safe to say Pearson would have a dynasty, winning 3 titles in 4 years to end the decade. So yeah, sadly, no title battles went down to the final race. But to be fair, the 1960s were really considered the weakest era in NASCAR history. And this is in before all the fucking boomers come in the comment section saying, "Oh, how dare you disrespect Richard Petty and all them drivers in the 60s for that. You don't know racing back in my day when racing was racing, you goddamn young super bums." It was really weak, especially when you had Richard Petty winning 10 races in a row and 27 races in a season. And let's be real, social media was around back in the 60s. Everyone would lose their shit over Richard Petty winning 10 races in a row and 27 races in a season. Let's be real on that one. But yeah, really the next part of the series will be, of course, the 1970s in the Cup Series, which was, of course, the start of the modern era. And I've actually done a couple seasons in the 70s, mainly 1972 and 1973, because originally I was going to start this series at 1972 until I decided to change my mind and start it back at the beginning. And there's a couple of close championship battles for sure. So yeah, like I said, for this series, the next part will come out whenever I have enough time, and if I'm quick enough to get the research done. All depends on how fast I do my research. Like I said in the first part, I'm in no rush to get this series done. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up for this part. I'll see you all in part 3 of the series. But yeah, that's all I got to say. Hope everyone's a great day, and yeah, peace out.